But even at school, I was the big defender, basically, and big defender of the school. And so if there were kids getting bullied by other schools, they kind of wheel me out and we'd battle it in the schoolyard or, wherever it was. And so it wasn't always in such a productive manner, but I've always been that person that's led more from the kind of leading from the community rather than leading the community.
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspects of running and what helps people to achieve success, however they define it, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. Thank you to Tracksmith for their continued support of this podcast. Tracksmith is an independent running brand inspired by a deep love of the sport. Their new fall collection just released and is now available. It features staples ready for all of your training and racing needs. As the weather begins to change, versatile pieces are essential for handling whatever the season holds. Tracksmith's Twilight Quarter Zip and Horizon Long Sleeve are standout transitional pieces on the run. The pin dot mesh of the Twilight Quarter Zip makes for a lightweight and airy top that can be layered or worn on its own. The Horizon Long Sleeve delivers the familiar feel of cotton with the performance of a tech blend that can be put through the paces and then be worn out for coffee afterwards. By using code FTLR at checkout, you can receive free shipping and support Bigger Than the Trail, an organization that is using trail running as a platform to advocate for mental health. This episode is brought to you by Freedom Solar Power, the company I use to go solar on my house. Go solar this year and you'll get to take advantage of the 30%, yep, that's new, federal tax credit next year. It's time to break free from rising electricity costs. When I first started looking into solar, I thought it would be a clunky and expensive process. Going solar isn't as hard as you think it is, and Freedom Solar is a turnkey solution focused on educating the consumer and making sure they have all the information they need to make sure going solar is right for them, both financially and as a way to help the planet. Freedom Solar operates in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, Florida, and now North Carolina too. There are plenty of other great options nationwide. This episode is brought to you by Revel Race Series. Revel is an incredibly fast and remarkably beautiful series of full and half marathons that take place in the most scenic U.S. locations. All the races feature a fast downhill slope and spectacular scenery. Their next race takes runners from the canyons of the Wasatch Mountains to the foothills of Salt Lake City, Utah on September 10th for the 10-year anniversary of Revel Big Cottonwood. Register at runrevel.com with code FTLR for $10 off. This episode is brought to you by Goodr. Goodr has the slickest shades around for only $25 and $35. They don't slip or bounce, and they stay on my face way better than more expensive sunglasses do. If you'd like to support me and the show, treat yourself to a pair or two or three of Goodrs and head over to goodr.com and get 15% off your entire order with the code FTLR. That's 15% off at goodr.com, code FTLR. Your face will thank you. And welcome back. I have Danny Bent joining me from across the pond in Sheffield. Danny, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast, and I'll get into why, but thanks for being here today.
Oh man, it's an absolute pleasure. I can't wait to get chatting.
It's been quite a few years since I've seen you, and as has become routine on this podcast, the first question is always the hardest. Who is Danny?
Oh wow. I guess I'm a kind of. I've started realizing that I'm a bit of an enigma. That I'm just living as myself, and which takes you in all sorts of crazy directions. So I could answer that by saying I'm an author, or I could say it by saying I'm an adventurer or a community builder. But really, I'm just me, just trying to be the best version of me, and that's where you have it. But yeah, I organize events. I take people on adventures. I go and do silly things myself. And if we can, it's really, I'm just trying to do a little bit of good in this crazy world we live in.
And you certainly are doing that. For those who don't know Danny, he launched a relay after the Boston. Actually, why don't you tell the story?
Yeah. I mean, to give it a little bit of foundation, my mum and dad were both like top class runners, and the love of running kind of fed through to me and my sisters, and we've run the London Marathon all together and all this sort of stuff. And so when I was just sitting in Devon listening to the radio, and then I started hearing about what happened in Boston, April 15th, 2013. You hear about 2 bombs going off, about eventually you learn that tens of people have lost their limbs, 4 people have lost their lives. And whether these are supporters or whether these are runners, this is still the community that has supported me my whole life. And, I found friendship, love, that whole community thing through running. And to see it attacked like that, I decided I had to do something about it, and came up with this harebrained idea that we could create a baton that would look like a peace lily, and then run it from LA to Boston, so West Coast to East Coast. And the idea was that we wouldn't be running it. We'd break that 3,300 miles up into 10-mile segments, stick it out on the internet, and see if we can get, the idea was that we'd try and get one American person to carry that baton for each of those segments, so that baton would be moving continuously until it reached Boston. And it's a crazy idea. Like I've got a terrible record for organization, and always when I give my talks, I like to talk about the fact that I went to the national champs for triathlon here, and I drove a mile to get to the champs, and turned round and realized I'd forgotten to put my bike in the car, and someone lent me a bike. And when I went to put my shoes on, I brought one of my size 9 and one of my mum's size 5 shoes. So that's the organization that was kind of hoping to do to organize this thing that would go across a whole continent.
You were the hype man and the community guy.
I mean, I was just like, the hype man, community guy, but I was just like, I was the one that felt the feelings. And I was sitting in the room with Kate when it all happened, and Kate does have organizational skills, and we just looked at each other and said, we've got to do something about this. And, to a certain extent, the rest is history. And I don't know whether you want me to go into the depths of it yet, or kind of toy around.
No, I think that's a good background, but this is such a fun conversation because I think, but I don't know for sure, but One Run for Boston and the people involved really brought me into this community and introduced November Project and all of the things that created the runner that I am today. So that run, I remember taking the train from Allston out to Cleveland Circle, and then I ran from Cleveland Circle to, or basically the reservoir, to the Newton City Hall.
Yeah.
We met at the Newton City Hall and turned around and ran from mile 19 to the finish line. And that was my first interaction with runners. Like people who trained for races. I met a guy who was training for a marathon. I was like, whoa, that's so far. Here I was running 10 miles that evening, thinking it was incredible. And at the time, it was I had only ever done that once. And it was the day after the bombing. And I mean, it was what an event. We ran those 10 miles or 7 miles and went to the bar afterwards.
The rattlesnake in Boston.
The rattlesnake, yes. And then a couple of days later, maybe the next day, we were out at Poorhouse with that same group of people. We went to a Red Sox game. We went to Poorhouse. And I remember being in Poorhouse at 12:30 a.m. and somebody mentioned November Project. And 12:30 in the morning, we all agreed to go the next morning. The rest was history.
Yeah, I mean, and so let's give the listeners just some context of the before of this as well. So let's go back to the relay, and there we are sticking it out on the internet and hoping 330 people are going to sign up, and it took ages actually, and we got a few media companies in the US were like, is this a kind of fraudulent thing that's just going to take the money? Which was that was very, because we were working. So we set off from LA basically 7 weeks after the bombing. So we were just working every moment of the day. So we were very, very tired even when we set off, let alone when we arrived. And anyway, the idea was we get 330 people to get signed up, but eventually thousands of people actually signed up, and we ran it twice that year and the year after. And by the end of that second year, we'd raised almost $600,000 for the people affected by the bombings. And I love that story because a tiny idea approached with passion and vigor can turn into something way bigger than you expect. And if you kind of reach out to the community and just say, guys, this is yours, run with it, and then you've got 1,000 people working on a project, it can go from strength to strength to strength to strength. So there's that. There's you meeting at Newton. I think there were about 1,000 people there, weren't there? It was absolutely mental, but it was a very celebratory feel at that point. And And then it's so funny that then we go to the Red Sox. Then we go and it's that I suspect we were probably a little bit inebriated
awesome.
at 12:30 at night, And for anyone that doesn't know, November Project starts at 6:30, so it was quite a pact. And did we all show? I can't even remember. Did we all show up?
We did.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very awesome. I was talking yesterday with Ryan Montgomery, who I just had on the podcast, and we were talking. He's putting together camps for the LGBTQ plus community. And he was commenting on how he was reading through like 100 different applications of people who wanted to go to his camp, and hearing that like none of them had any experience with people who were like them in that regard. And he was like, man, it's so cool how you can impact one person and then it has a ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
And here, talk about ripple effect. Imagine all the people that started running or met their community from strangers and became friends, and what happened specifically in Boston from this one idea that you guys had over in England.
Yeah. Someone described it as that, when you're skimming a stone and then each landing causes ripples, and each one of the times that the stone hits the water was one of these Baton handover points, of which there were like 330. And then the ripples just spread from there. I love that analogy of how that describes it, because that's exactly what it was. And like, your story is absolutely not alone, is it? And you probably had community around you and were achieving in exceptional ways even before this, but then somehow you can wrap yourself in a beautiful community, and sometimes things can just grow out of that you could never ever imagine.
So have you always been like this? Have you always been community or core and always thinking this way?
Probably. I mean, even at school, in rugby, all those sorts of things. For anyone listening, rugby is a game different to football or American football, soccer and American football. But even at school, I was the big defender, basically, and big defender of the school. And so if there were kids getting bullied by other schools, they'd kind of wheel me out and we'd battle it in the schoolyard or, wherever it was. And so it wasn't always in such a productive manner, but I've always been that person that's led more from the kind of leading from the community rather than leading the community. So like, I just go for everything full bore and, with as much enthusiasm as it just happens. It's not like I'm saying, I need to give this lots of enthusiasm. It's just like, I'm an enthusiastic guy. I love life. And people, I think they just see that, and it makes them more comfortable in themselves to be more like that themselves. So to be more passionate about things, to be more willing to take a step forward when others aren't taking that step forward. And but I also liken it to being a 7-year-old where I just don't have I don't have those silly fears. I'm not worried about what other people are saying. I'm just really present in this one moment, and that has made me a pretty happy guy. And other people see that happiness emanating from someone who's very, very present in the moment. And, they bring themselves back to that 7-year-old version of themselves and start kind of questioning the things that go on in our society that are probably not very productive for happiness, well-being, community, all those sorts of things. So,
yeah, it's an awesome approach, particularly these days when there is so much going on in the world that isn't fun or enjoyable. I'm curious about the last, like, I mean, I haven't seen you for at least, I don't know, five plus years. Curious, how has the pandemic been for you as someone who thrives on community and hugging people and being close and being, intimate in a friendly way, at least?
Yeah. Quite interesting because like my whole life is built, my living, all the things that I'm doing are built around community. And I give talks at Google or Facebook or wherever they are, but you still need a community there to listen to you. And when I give my talks, I ask everyone to stand up and turn to the person on the left, the person on the right, and give them a hug and say it's awesome that you're here. And that's my whole living it felt like it was the breakthrough year for me. I think 2020. And I was like, oh man, I'm not going to have to worry anymore. Like I'm not scraping through and feeding off scraps. I'm like going to take a big piece. And suddenly this happens. And yes, it was kind of like worrying, but as everything got taken away. But in the same breath, it was super powerful in the way it freed me, because there's nothing I can do right now. There's no searching for new talks. There's no creating communities. There's no bringing people together. All of those things just suddenly fell away, and I probably found myself feeling quite free. And which is something I'm looking into now in my own life. It's more the reflection now than I was actually feeling at the time. But just massively, fortunately, two of my best mates moved into my house a couple of months before the lockdown, who are active people who enjoy life, who share my lust for life, really. And so the lockdown, we ended up we were still allowed to go out running. I think most people were around the world. And so we were still able to go out running together because we were sharing a place. But also we all like arts and music. So we set up a little band that played outside the house on a Thursday evening. And so yes, I stopped with the normal type of community, but I didn't know what my neighbors, I didn't know anything about my neighbors. I knew the names of the people next door to me, but anyone else on my street, I didn't know. And suddenly, by doing these kind of musical nights where everyone came out, they kept their distance. One of the guys owned a brewery, so he'd bring out a whole barrel of beer for everyone to enjoy. And suddenly you've created a community on your street where there was nothing before. And that's still, that is still thriving now, which is super cool to have come from COVID and lockdown and all that sort of stuff. But because I think, in all honesty, I kind of thrived in that period, and I really had time to work on my fitness. And I was, one of my memories with you is me and you striving. I think we were striving to get sub 18, weren't we? At those 5Ks that we were doing in Boston, and so I'm smashing those records now, which is great because I'm now 43 years old. So I'm kind of getting PBs in a sport that I've been taking kind of seriously my whole life. So there's loads of good things that came from it, but it's also tangled up the kind of whole thing that I was doing. And, people aren't quite 100% sure about coming back into things. Even now, like, it's that kind of, what do I want to sign up to do something with other people? There's just a moment's question of, do I want to do that? And then there's a second moment's question of, will it get cancelled? So that energy and lust for what I actually bring has probably been, taken away a little bit. But I feel it coming back, and it's, everything's going great again now, and which is good news.
Yeah, I think it leads to people being a little more deliberate with their time, right? If you're going to say yes to something, you're going to say yes to it. You're not, half there. You're not going to show up for 5 minutes and leave. I don't want to say it's an effort to do things now, but there's I don't want to say for everyone, there's like a hesitation sometimes of, do I really want to do that? And what myself and a lot of my friends discovered early on in the pandemic was just how much you could work if you didn't think about it, right? Like, you could always be on. I started a newsletter in 2020 because I was bored and needed more stuff to do. And I was just like taking on projects and projects and projects. And I just remember a pretty poignant line from one of my high school buddies. And he was just thinking about it. He was like, man, we can't keep doing it like this. Like, there needs to be a delineation between work and play and work and life.
Mm.
And I hit the wall a couple of times in 2020 and 2021 before realizing like I needed that boundary and needed to work on that boundary. And I think that the refocus on community, the refocus on yourself and investing in yourself has certainly been illuminated.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about that because that's something that I'm experiencing as well, and I'm not sure where that path is going to lead. But I've had to bring into my life that I go for a run in the morning so that I don't sit up in bed, start working, and it's so complex, isn't it? And when your life is, I used to say I just want to be paid for being me. That's what I want, and to a certain extent that's now happened, but sometimes the things you wish for are not always the best for you. And life now is work, so almost, although I have a lot of playtime, there's a lot of brain space taken up from waking up to going to bed, and probably whilst I'm asleep taken up with work. Just that kind of low murmur of it, and being aware of little things. So I'm just trying to write that kind of balance right now, which I think probably, it's like you say, it's a product of COVID and having time and then suddenly not having time. But definitely for me, I was like, I've been saying yes to way too many things because there was no chance of saying yes to anything. It felt great to have that time just to yourself to do the things that you want to do rather than the things you feel you should do. And I've definitely been saying no to things that I don't want to do now. And I think people are open to it as well. It's like, I'm not a big fan of a stag do, a bachelor party kind of thing, where there's loads of boozing and potentially other debauchery. And I'm just like, if that's happening, I'm just not in it. It's just not my bag. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to come. But I'll be there at the wedding and I'll have a great time with you. And so that there's nice things that come from it.
I'm curious about some of the other ways that you sort of rectify or course correct that. For me, I found that the easiest way to do it is to go up in the mountains and lose cell coverage. But it's not really as sustainable or, I don't want to say efficient, but like you can't do that all the time. But it definitely is like a nice hard reset.
Absolutely. I just got back from the Himalayas, actually, climbing up to Mount Makalu, and there's no reception at all. And it was 20 of us doing it, and it was unbelievable. The way people communicated together and came together during it was just the most beautiful thing. And then we came back down from the mountain, and we get to a town that has a little bit of coverage. And 50% of the people who came and decided to switch their phones on, 50% decided they'd have one more day and switch them on when we got to Kathmandu. And the disjoint between the group and the people sitting there on their phones, now just completely and utterly staring into their phones, whilst other people are trying to have a conversation, just kind of blew everything up. It was fascinating, but I've just felt amazing away from it because you can't do anything.
Yeah,
so you start getting on with life.
It's cool. It's one of the reasons I like camping because you're out there and there's usually no cell coverage. What seems to be common in Colorado is if you don't hear back from a friend on a text or whatever, their text will turn green and you're like, oh, they're up in the mountains. And I'll hear from them in 1 to 3 days. And it's just like, it's something that just happens here, which is so cool. But yeah, it was the same thing. I was out in the Aspen area and we were camping and we came into cell range for dinner. And I was like, I don't want to turn it on yet. And so I didn't. And then I did. And I wished I didn't. But
yeah,
we're so connected to everyone else except those like right in front of us. It's one of the reasons I love this podcast. And I did the first 50 episodes of the podcast in person. And what I really loved about that was like it was an hour of uninterrupted conversation with another person that you're connecting with. And how infrequently do we have that now where you talk to one person and you're fully invested for an hour?
Yeah, it's probably very, very rare. And even if we were having a chat and it wasn't the podcast, it was just like a Zoom meeting, I'd be kind of sneaking my phone underneath the camera and I'd be like answering things on my phone when we were doing it. So, just the way the podcast is, that stops you doing that, which makes it even more awesome. But I guess back in the day, that's what we were all doing. because there was nothing else to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's switch gears a little bit and wind it back.
Yeah.
Danny, as a kid, getting into running. Talk to me about that.
Oh, as a kid getting into running. Well, I mean, I guess, it's just, I was completely and utterly like thrown into this world. And I'm pretty much, as soon as I was walking, I was probably going out running, because my dad would go out running every day. I think he went through a period of 3 years or something of training every day. And some days because he was doing ultras before anyone was doing ultras. He was like, I think he was second in the world at ultra running when there were fewer people doing ultra running. So it was easier to be second in the world. But he would train like before work, at lunchtime, after work. And so like, I wanted to be with my dad. So I would go out and I would run. If he was doing a hill session, I would go out there with him, and I would I'd be running kind of up and down like 5 meters or something while he's doing a 100-meter rep or whatever it was. But I'd see him turn and I'd turn around. So, and I remember when I think I was probably like 8 or 9 years old, and I went around one of my mates' houses and I asked like openly to the family, when does your dad go for his run? And his dad's like, sitting on the sofa, like a big guy. He's like, what are you even talking about? I just thought everyone did it. It's like brushing your teeth.
That's awesome. Okay, so fast forward. So your dad's doing ultras. When did you start running longer distances? Because you've done some pretty epic relays and pretty epic pushes all in one go.
Yeah, I mean, when I was at school, I used to run 200 meters, and that's still my number. I'm still best at 200 meters, but going to a track meet and you run 200 meter on the Saturday, wherever it is, 23 seconds or whatever, and then you run one on the Sunday, it's like 46 seconds, and the whole weekend's gone, which is not like, that doesn't really fit into my making the most of life kind of mentality. So I ended up just, going, and I just do everything now. Well, I say I do everything. I don't really do ultras, which is quite interesting. I have run a couple of things that are just over a marathon distance, but yeah, so been doing those. Obviously, we ran across America, but that's not me doing it. That's someone else. And we broke the world record in London in another event that we were breaking down gang culture. A few years back, it got really, really serious in London, and like numerous people were dying every day. And that's not the norm for London. So we did a relay there that kind of brought everyone together a little bit and tried to give a message of peace and unity, which resonates with everything that we do. But I do also do some silly things, like we ran across Iceland. That's 10 marathons in 10 days. Well, yeah, 10 marathons and ultra marathons. But the thing is, when you're doing something like that, you're setting off in the morning and all you've got to do is eat and run. So you've got the whole day to run 26, 30 miles, whatever it is that you're doing. And by the end of it, you're amazed at how fast you've blitzed it through. And this is another one of those experiences where you're really fully in the present, and you get one extra spoonful of peanut butter with your porridge in the morning. It's like, yes, this is the best meal ever. And but it's, because you're in the present, and this is the best meal ever because this is the only meal that exists right now in the whole world. And that's the same for sleep. And just being able to sit down or something like that, just feel like, oh, this is just so good. And all you're doing is sitting down, which is what we spend most of the rest of our lives doing. It really puts a kind of highlight onto the beauty of all the simple things of life.
If you've been enjoying this podcast and can spare 90 seconds of your time today, can you do me a favor? Can you pop over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review? It helps other people find and enjoy the podcast too. Thanks so much. Thanks again to Tracksmith for supporting the podcast and for their continued support of not just this podcast, but for the running community in general. I'm proud to partner with Tracksmith, and I'm excited that with all purchases made using the code FTLR, you will get free shipping, and Tracksmith will donate 5% to Bigger Than the Trail, an organization that is using trail running as a platform to advocate for and provide resources related to mental health. Thanks again to Freedom Solar for supporting this episode of the podcast, as well as our desire for a greener energy source. The buying process was fascinating and so eye-opening, most notably how simple and cost-effective it can be. I'm excited to pay my learnings forward. If you're curious, message me on Instagram or Twitter, and I'd be happy to help you get in contact with some great resources or even just answer some questions. Freedom Solar is a full-service solar company installing solar panels and backup power systems since 2007. They operate in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, Florida, and now North Carolina too. My parents have the same panels from a different company in Massachusetts. More than a few friends and podcast listeners have already gone solar, and they're all so excited and happy with the process with Freedom Solar so far. Revel Race Series is an incredibly fast and remarkably beautiful series of full and half marathons that take place in the most scenic U.S. locations. All the races feature a fast downhill slope and spectacular scenery. Their next race takes runners from the canyons of the Wasatch Mountains to the foothills of Salt Lake City, Utah on September 10th for the 10-year anniversary of Revel Big Cottonwood. Featuring a speedy downhill slope and spectacular scenery, this race will be sure to help you set your PR and finally hit that BQ time, as it's the fastest marathon and half marathon in the state of Utah. Register at runrevel.com with code FTLR for $10 off until July 31st. Thanks again to Gooder for supporting this episode. I have a few different styles of shades, and I've been loving them on runs or while at the pool. At $25 a pop, you can leave a pair in your car so that you'll never be without some shades. You can feel good about your purchase too, as 1% of Gooder's annual gross sales, not profits, go directly to environmental nonprofits working towards making our world a better place. If you'd like to support me in the show, treat yourself to a pair or two or three of Gooders and head over to gooder.com and get 15% off your entire order. That's 15% off at GOODR.com with the code FTLR. Your face will thank you. I've got to link you up with my coach, David Roche. You and him epitomize the same, like, everything is awesome always because life is awesome. And it's not always awesome, but awesome stuff is awesome. And it's just like, it's a bit of a paraphrase, but yeah, bringing that type of energy into the world, into how you do things is infectious in a good way.
Yeah, it definitely is. But I think I'm not clinically diagnosed, but a doctor said to me, "Do you take medicine for your ADHD?" And I was like, "Oh, I didn't know I had ADHD." And she was like, "You're the most ADHD person I've ever met." And I know I've done some my own research into that, and one of the things with people with ADHD is they're really super in the present. And if they turn themselves to one, they get this like crazy hyper focus of energy. But if you're not into it, you're a zero. So I think it's my super strength, and I wouldn't want to take anything to deaden that power. And it'd be really interesting if your coach has got anything similar that makes him have. Because I do see it when you see people who have those similar sort of traits. They tend to have something just a little bit wobbly in their minds, or it's not wobbly, is it? It's just things. It's
different.
Human. We're all human, and there's no defects. It's just like society is not really built for people who are with that energy. People, they really, society wants you to sit in a cell and keep doing the same thing until you die, which that's never ever going to happen. And if they tried to do that, I would end up exploding. So.
You're saying all this, and I'm like, yes. This describes me to a T. So I have been clinically diagnosed with ADHD right. In third grade, and like I am hyper focused on what's going on in front of me. It's why I'm good at certain things and terrible at others. And yeah, you just learn to like harness that and like use it for getting really amped about certain things, and then figuring out ways to either delegate the other stuff or stuff gets missed. Like I read something that people with ADHD have messy desks. And if you could see my desk, it's like full of stuff that I need to do. Like there's a business card here of someone I need to reach out to. There's a supplement here that I need to take every morning. And it's just like, this is how I cope and how I like get the stuff done that I need to get done, or like do my checklist. And to some people, it's like, yeah, of course, that makes complete sense. And then to others, like, your place is a shithole. clean it up. And it's just so fascinating how different people's brains work.
Yeah, I've always looked at you as someone who is functioning. You seem like you've got some organization behind you. But for me, I've brought it in from other people. So Jamie, I've got another business partner that helps with all the organization stuff, and they take back seat. And everyone looks at me as the person who fronts everything. Is like, oh my God, Dan, you're just like, how do you even do these things? I'm like, let me ask Nick how we do this, because I've got no idea.
So the gig is up. I'm the same way. I don't have it together. I just have a lot of people who help me keep it together. So like I've hired someone, her name is Emily, to help with the podcast. And half of her job is like managing me through a spreadsheet. And you do what you have to do, and you thrive on your strong skills and leverage other people's skills for other stuff. And I'm fortunate that like I have sponsors for this podcast that allow me to pay somebody else to like help me keep it together.
Yeah, I love a spreadsheet when someone else is doing it. It's absolutely amazing.
Totally. Yeah. My spreadsheets are messy and chaotic, but they make sense to me.
Yeah, that's the way it is.
So I've done over 200 episodes of this podcast, and there are a handful of topics that I find to be really interesting to discuss with everyone. I like to talk about goal setting, success and failure, motivation, etc. Particularly with people who conventionally appear to be successful or they've done awesome stuff in life. And I really like to dig into like how they define success from a subjective standpoint. So the question is, how do you define success?
I think for me, it's really tricky, because I'm actually going through this process in my mind where I'm trying to make finances more important. And someone said to me the other day, they said, what, like they're questioning, like, do you have any like aims or goals that you're setting for your business self or your business? I'm like, no, I don't think so. I'm just kind of flying by the seat of my pants. But then they said, like, what about your personal life? What do you think about your personal life? I was like, I'd like to just be earning about, whatever, £3,000-4,000 a month so that I can be completely free. And the person who was asking me these questions was like, isn't it so interesting that you put money into your personal goals rather than into your work goals? Like, it's really back to that's a work goal, like to earn an amount of money. But for me, it's kind of like personal, because I'm just having to hold on to it as something that's serious. But I think freedom is so massive for me. I just want to be able to do, express, be whatever it is that is within me. And yes, I've got a good moral, like my own moral code book that I kind of do live by, and that's I don't know, but I assume that doesn't work for everyone if your moral code isn't quite as strong. But I'm like, my rules are the ones I live by, and the other ones that the world sets they're almost irrelevant. As long, like, I don't want to hurt people, I don't want to cause damage to other people's lives. But if doing something that is not traditionally the way of doing things is the way I want to do it, I just do it that way. But yeah, goal setting, I've been pretty rubbish, and I've always said in conversations when people like to ask who you aspire to be and who inspired you as a kid and all this. I find it really, really weird, that question, because like, why? I don't know. Like, why would anyone else inspire me? Because why am I going to try and be like anyone else? Like, the only person I can be is me. So just be the best version of me, and that's it. It feels a bit like I'm missing something, because that's just such a traditional thing. And it's the same with, even because I'm not into social culture and all this sort of stuff, that you go out with the lads and someone says who is the person you'd most like to sleep with who's famous, or something like, just a rubbish question that idiots ask. I'm like, someone asks that, I'm like, panic. It's the only time I get really worried. And I'm just like struggling to think of one famous person's name. So yes, I'm not really goal driven, but I guess my goal is freedom. And if anything adds to freedom, then I'll strive for it. But then that doesn't quite equate to the community things that I build up, because when you're the leader of a community, it can be really, really, really lonely, and it can be a very, very contained life that you end up living, because you have to put on your best self for everyone else, especially if your role there is this energized person. And so everyone thinks you're okay. But you link everyone in. You're like, oh, this isn't happening well in your life. You need to speak to this person. Like bringing everyone together. But there's no one doing that for you, and that's a very, very interesting place to be in. Very, at times in my life, I've felt very, very lonely and cut off from everyone. Even though people would say you're the most submerged in community person that they ever know.
How would you define community?
That's a good question. I guess, is it a gathering of people that will then achieve more together and individually and together than they would do if they hadn't been part of that community? And I guess that works even if it's your own mental well-being, which is the achievement or the well-being of the group. It's not something I've really thought about. It's like, isn't that hilarious? You ask a question like, what is community to you? My job is about community. I don't even know how I would describe community. What's your thoughts on that?
I like your answer. I also find it to be like a group of people who shares a collective goal or desire or passion.
Yeah.
But to recap what you said, a place where 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. We're all better because of it.
Because almost your description, coming together of people around passion or a shared interest or whatever it is, that's actually what creates the community. It's like November Project. People probably are coming because they think it's a kind of fitness workout. And then they come for one session and then they're like, oh, right, this isn't about fitness. This is about my whole life and being a better me and being, just surrounded by complete and utter love and positivity and support. And that's what you gain in one session. And if you've been there for a year or whatever, you're like, these communities are transformative, not in the way you think they're going to be. Yes, you end up getting badass fit as well, but that absolutely isn't the greatest achievement that you've taken from this community, I guess.
Completely agree. Yeah, I love that. It's sort of the fitness is a byproduct of the connectivity and the togetherness and the ability to have 1 + 1 = 3 and be better in a group than you could be individually.
Yeah, and just that commitment that you make to those other people to be there, like, it's just show up, that's the whole thing. It just keeps you at it. Like, even when you're feeling a little bit hungover on that day, that when we made a pact at 12:30 in the morning kind of thing, we all showed up because we made a pact with each other, and that's beautiful.
I was also a resilient 22-year-old.
That is true. Yeah, it gets harder, doesn't it?
It sure does.
No, but I think if you got into it again and you were doing it every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you would be back and you'd be like, oh, this is easy to do again because I'm in the habit.
Right.
But now I'm like, if I ever was to get up at 5:30 for something happening at 6:30, I wouldn't sleep because I'd be so worried about making sure I was up at 5:30.
Right. So again, switching gears, when you're doing, and I have some ideas on or guesses, but when you're doing these talks with Google and other companies, what are you focusing on?
The thing I focus on in those things, which is different to what I would tell them if I was trying to sell this to people, is making people feel something. Because lots of people go through their lives not really feeling anything, and especially not feeling something that's positive. And so, my talks they've been massively influenced by me being voted one of the 100 happiest people in the UK. And suddenly people want to hear your thoughts on life. And so I'm storytelling, I tell stories, and then I pull out the lessons that I learned, because I've lived an absolutely wild life. From pogoing across Togo, cycling from London to India, these big relays, all sorts of things that I'm up to. And from that, you just get so many stories. I've got like a black book that is so rich in stories that, anyway, so I tell these stories when I'm up on stage, and I pull out a little kind of theme of a lesson that got me through that. Normally they're things that make people cringe or kind of get worried. And I obviously tell about the run across America, where actually it's a beautiful moment where I talk about the Boston Marathon, and they know me as slightly as someone who's interested in running already. And I make them all kind of feel like they're taking part. And I kind of explain that their hips are kind of echoing the pounding of their feet from 26.2 miles as they turn this left onto Boylston, that their blood feels like it's full of glass and their buttocks have been chafing for 10 miles. And then I get them to do the actions with me. And they're like, but you turn onto Boylston Street, you see that blue and yellow finish line, and you know that all that hard work has been worth it. And you look to the people on the left, you give them a nod to the people cheering your name, you give them a nod to say, I'm going to make it. You look at the journalists on the right-hand side, they know you're going to make it. You put your hands in the air as you're going to go across that finish line and turn that kind of grimace upside down for a smile for the photograph. And then a loud metallic noise silences everything. And people are laughing their heads off. It's so simple. Just by making them put their hands in there, they're laughing. And then suddenly you turn it to the bombs. And people just go from laughter to bursting into tears in a second. And for me, that's all I want to do, because if you feel something, you'll remember the associated lesson or the associated experience. And people come out of these talks thinking their lives have been changed, or you've changed their life. But what you've done is just shown them a door to look through, or shown them a window of their life, and be like, there are choices you can make in life. And being kind, being open, putting your phone down, finding that tiny chink of positivity in whatever you're doing, building community, all those things can lead to you having happiness running through your veins, which is generally how I find myself.
Wow. Yeah. I got the chills listening to you talk about making that turn and then having
unbelievable, isn't it?
Having it all change.
Yeah. And I'm just talking about it. The people that went through that, unbelievable. And I actually talk about John Odom, who was obviously there and had his legs blown to pieces. And the fact that he was there, I think the picture's got you in it, actually, going across the finish line. Nicole Reese, his daughter, who he'd been hoping to cheer across the finish line, is pushing him in his wheelchair, holding the baton. 7 weeks after he's been lying on, in a pool of his own blood, and after dying twice on the operating table. And I actually, when I was writing the book about that run across America, the doctor was saying he lost more blood than I'd ever seen someone survive, kind of thing. And the way John came back to that area is just unbelievable. The fact that he honored our relay with his presence. And then when Nicole was pushing him across the line, he looked up at me and was like, Dan, this is when I start to heal. And I'm just like, what a man, what a character. He's literally in this place of trauma and he's giving to me. And, it gives me tears and it's not about the bombings. It's not about completing the run or anything like this. It's the beauty of humanity and what humans can give to one another if you allow yourself to do it. And for me, those words are the things that keep me going whenever I'm at a hard patch. I just listen to them in my own head, obviously. This is when I start to heal. I'm like, my path's good. I've taken the right path. This is cool.
That's incredible. I've gotten to know Adrienne Hazlitt a bit recently. We worked with her on her quest for Boston 2022.
Right.
And to hear her talk about her return to Boylston and how, the mental strength it must take to return to a place that should have killed you or could very easily have killed you, in a brutal way, and you're conquering it. It's incredible.
That's the human spirit right there.
Yeah. I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah. And hugely lucky that I managed to qualify for Boston this year. I've got really good connections with those guys, and they very often said, if you want to place, Dan, you've got a place, you can come and run. And I'm like, no, I want to qualify because it doesn't feel right. to run Boston without qualifying. For me personally, as a runner that's, I'm not top end runner, but qualification was within me. And it feels like the universe is involved, which is, we could go into this because I talk about the universe and the coming together of things that the universe has empowered in the same way as someone else might talk about God, which I think is another super interesting topic that we could talk about another time. But I qualified in Manchester in April to run in Boston and Boston 2023. And then I look on my calendar, I'm like, that's 10 years since the bombings, 10 years since we ran across the States and raised all that cash. And I'm just like, this was meant to be. I was meant to turn down those other places, or I was meant to be fail to qualify in the time leading up to this. And this is the moment. And that's, really beautiful for me.
That's so cool. So between now and then, you're also involved in another relay. You want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah. So, the beauty of these relays has always been the passing of the baton, the moment that you see that baton coming round the corner and it's destined for you. And then you've got to run, let's call it 10 miles. Sometimes it's 10K, whatever. But this next section is yours. And the beauty of the relay is that without you completing your one segment, the whole thing falls to pieces. So for people, it feels like the Olympic final for them. And yes, you're running at 11-minute mile pace or something like this. It doesn't matter. You're getting that baton from A to B to pass it to the next person. And people see this baton after it's been touched by 1,000 people or so, knowing that there's thousands more waiting for it. And they see this baton come around the corner and they'll burst into tears just seeing it because of what it means to them. And so we were keen after COVID to get something physical happening. We did a few virtual things during COVID, which were great, but they were not what makes my soul sing. And I don't think humanity's soul sing. And so we've come up with the most pressing thing at the moment is what's happening to our climate. If I say this at a time when the UK is hitting its all-time highest temperature by not just 0.1 of a degree, we're hitting it by 3 degrees hotter than it's ever been, which is crazy. But and so we're doing a relay from COP26 to COP27, with the COP events are all about climate change. They get all the leaders of the world go there, and they're working out how they can work together as a community of leaders to save this planet. And how apt that the children of Glasgow, where COP26 was last year, they've written a message to the leaders of today that they want them to hear. It's like the demand from the leaders of tomorrow, I guess. And that message has been put inside our baton, and we're going to run it from Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, 7,500 kilometers, 5,000 miles, whatever it's going to be. And then that message is going to be read to the leaders of today in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And hopefully we're visiting projects along the way. We're hoping to have 1 million school kids get involved along the way. And it's that kind of question that if not now, when? And you can relate that doesn't have to be related to climate change. That's just everything in life. If not now, when? And so we're very good at putting on long distance relays that can grab the attention of the media, and hopefully that can add some weight to the children's message that is going to be going to those leaders. So you have to be in Europe, really. Obviously, it goes into Israel and Egypt at the very latter stage, but it's a super mega cool thing to be part of. And world leaders in Europe and the Israeli prime minister is going to be involved, and it's educational ministers from nearly every single country are signing up to get involved. So it's going to be super cool. And if we can have with all these things, like everything that I've ever done, it's not about creating drastic, crazy change. I don't think that's possible especially for a small team. But what we can do is just plant a few seeds, and if those seeds grow into mighty oaks, then that's all we care about. And that can be just changing one person's perception, or it can be changing thousands. And either way, it's worth it.
Amazing. Danny, thanks so much for taking some time to chat today, and definitely see you in Boston 10 years in the making.
Yeah, man. Next year, it'd be great to see you there. It's been so nice to chat. Thanks, man.
Likewise. Excited to share this one, and we'll see you out there soon.
Sweet, man.
That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too. This podcast and the accompanying music has been produced by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound. For the Long Run's logo was created by Vanessa Wolf of Sterling Wolf. Show notes have been written by Ruby Wiles and is managed by Emily Holland. It takes a village.